Welcome to our next audit cast. I know it's been a little bit of a hiatus there for us, but we're now back in action and we've got a whole list of different topics we're going to be covering over the next couple of weeks, in addition to some outside interest topic pieces that you might find interesting dealing with iOS programming and a couple of other things as well. Today, though, we're going to jump in and take a look at how we can use PowerShell to do a little bit of investigation to a Windows domain, especially when it comes to extracting out information about user information. The real goal that we have today is to see if we can create some kind of a system to automatically pull out all of the users within our domain and identify the last time that those users logged in. Now, the reason we're looking for this is a very common audit type of activity to determine whether or not there are any accounts that are perhaps fallen into disuse, to find out whether or not there are accounts that are simply not necessary, those sorts of things. Additionally, there are some other tasks we may like to do, but we're going to take a look at those in some more depth as we go through some of the future episodes. For example, taking a look and seeing whether or not we have accounts for which there are non-expiring passwords or no password required. But again, we'll take a look at that in some other episodes. Right now, though, you can see on my screen there's some stuff going on here. What's happened is, before I started the webcast, I actually started up the Powershell Editor. Now, you can get to the Powershell Editor either by right-clicking on an existing PowerShell script. For instance, right here I have one called Groups. If I choose Edit, that will bring up the PowerShell Editor. But if you'd like to bring it up right from the command prompt, or maybe from the Start menu, the way to do it is by executing PowerShell ISE. Now, just as a little warning there, so you don't get a little excited, maybe open up 5 or 6 of them at a time, it does seem to take a bit of time for the PowerShell ISE to get started. So just be prepared for that. There is a little bit of a wait. Now that it's up and running, though, let me create a new PowerShell document in here, and I'm going to get started creating some code. Now, with the code that we create today, I want to be really clear with you about what you should expect to find, because some of the code that we do may look very scary, especially if you're more of a traditional auditor. But one of the things that I try to make a big point of in the classes that I teach for auditing, especially those where I have some basic scripting included, is that it's more about learning the recipes to get the information you need than it is about the actual scripting. For instance, we are going to have maybe 5 or 6 lines of code here that look really complicated and don't make a whole lot of sense. Don't worry about those so much, because those 5 or 6 lines, it turns out, are going to be the same in absolutely every PowerShell script you write that's going to involve interacting with the Active Directory to query information. So once we've got that recipe out of the way, sort of a template, it's really just a matter of changing around what it is that we'd like to query and get out of the Active Directory. So let's jump right in. I'm going to begin by starting by creating a variable called domain. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I like to abstract my code as much as I can so that I can take this code and maybe drop it into a new domain, give it to another Active Directory manager, use it on an audit in any domain, and still be able to get the information without having to edit the code. So I'm going to create this first line here, this Active Directory domain line, and let me just type it in here and tell you what it does. And what it's going to allow me to do, this is the piece that's really important. The first piece there, the System Directory Services Active Directory.domain, this is a class identifier, and then I'm calling this method on that class. I'm saying I'd like to get the current domain. And what this will extract for me is the current domain information. Now I'm going to come back to that and why we're going to use it in just a minute, but that's going to get that piece of information for me so that I don't have to come back and modify the script if I were to, for instance, hard code the actual domain name in here. The next thing I need to do is create a search object that I'm going to use to search the Active Directory. So I'm again going to create another variable, beginning it with a $sign, which is how we define variables in PowerShell. And since it's an Active Directory search object, I'll call it ADSearch. And to create this object, I need to tell it that I need a new object. And there's actually a commandlet for that, new object. And then simply type in the name of the object that you need. Now, the name of the object I need, it's actually within a couple of other libraries. So the system, and part of that is directory services. And then underneath that, here's the actual kind of object I need, directory searcher. So that line right there creates a new empty Active Directory search. You can think of it like a search engine almost. Something that I can send queries to and find out what's going on in my Active Directory. For that to work well though, we're going to have to do a little bit of configuration. For example, one of the things we're going to have to do is set up what the root is of the search. So where in the Active Directory should it begin searching? Now you could actually get away with not defining this, but especially if you have multiple domains, this would be a pretty important thing to do. But for us, it's just good practice to do it. I'm going to define that to be, and now inside of parentheses, or inside of quotation marks here, notice what I've entered. So I'm saying to begin doing our searching from, well, Active Directory is an LDAP service, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. That's the protocol that's used to actually do queries in and out of Active Directory. And then we've actually put this into a Uniform Resource Locator, a URL, and we've said that where we want to look in our LDAP is here, $domain. Now that might look familiar because it came out of the first line. That's where we define the current domain that we're actually in, the domain that this system and this user account is a member of. So that once that's taken care of, we just need a few more things to do. For instance, one of the things we ought to do is set up the search scope. If I don't define the search scope, it could just look at that single object to see whether or not it can find any of what I'm looking for here. Now that doesn't sound like it could be bad, but it actually might be, because chances are when I do this kind of a search in an Active Directory, what I'd really like to do is search the entire Active Directory instead of looking at just one aspect of it. For instance, just looking inside of one OU. For instance, if I didn't define this, I would only be looking in the top level of the organizational unit structure. And typically, we don't have any users there at all, so that's not the right thing to search for. Instead, I'd like to set my search scope to be subtree. That means it will start in the organizational unit that we set as the search root, that is the root of the domain, and then we'll traverse all the way through all of the subtrees, seeing if it can identify any of the types of objects that we're looking for in the rest of the directory. That's perfect. Now this next line is the last one of these weird lines that we're not going to take apart a lot and really dig into because they're just part of the recipe. We also need to set up the AD search page size. Now there's actually a default. I think the page size is 200 by default, although I could be wrong on that. I'm going to set the number a little smaller, 100, and just explain what that means, because sometimes people misunderstand that. When you use something like the DSQuery tool and you set a limit, that's setting a hard limit for the number of things that you're going to get back. That's not what this is doing. Instead, what this is doing is setting up how many results should come back in each set of results. For example, if I had 100,000 users, it might not be a good idea to try to pull out all 100,000 user records at the same time. Not only will that take a lot of memory, but it's also some significant network load. Instead, by setting the page size to 100, what will actually happen is it will pull out a query or do a query for the first 100 of those records. And as we process through them, it will automatically go and get the next 100, and then the next 100, and the next 100, until we have all of them. So it reduces the amount of memory that's required, in addition to just making the whole thing a bit more efficient. Of course, you can tinker with that number up and down to see whether or not you can balance out the efficiency in terms of time versus resources. All right. Well, there's really just one more line we need that's going to be part of our boilerplate, but this particular line is one that will likely change. So far, I've defined an AD search in terms of the different parameters it needs, the root to start in, the scope to look in, what the page size will be, but I have not yet told it what to look for. So one of the other parameters that we can set up here is the filter. Now the filter we're going to use here is actually going to be written in an LDAP query language. We're going to make it very simple for this particular episode, though over the next couple of episodes we'll actually look at some more advanced ways of specifying some of these LDAP queries. In this case here, what I'm going to do is tell it I would like to find everything whose object class is user. Now there's a variety of things we could put in there for our search. Object class, object category, there's all sorts of things. And we're not going to, in this episode, get into the distinctions between classes and categories and how you do multiple conditions in here and ands and ors. We're not going to do that here. However, as we go through those future episodes, it's this piece right here that is the primary piece that needs to change. All right, so the code we have so far, you could really look at as boilerplate code that you're going to use every single time you want to do a query into Active Directory. Remember, too, that as an auditor especially, the reason that we're writing it as a script here is so that once I figure out how to get this information out, I don't have to figure it out again. And also, one other thing, some might wonder, well, you know, if I can get that information that we're looking for here with something like DSQuery and DSGet, which you might be familiar with from some of our other episodes. For instance, if we could do a DSQuery for user accounts, there we go, we get the user accounts, and I can put that through something like DSGet. In fact, let me just pull up the help for DSGet for just a moment here, and let's see what sorts of things we have here. Let me, DSGet user. And let's see, we're looking for last name, DN, security principal. Let's see, looking for that last logon ID. Let's see if we can find it here. Password never expires, disabled. Well, you can see all of the different things we can get in here, and one of them will be the last logon ID, though it doesn't jump out at me exactly where that is right now. So we can pull in all of this information using DSQuery and DSGet. Why don't we just use that? After all, can't I use the information we get out of DSQuery and DSGet with PowerShell? The answer is that you can. However, doing it with PowerShell and mixing those two, DSQuery and DSGet with PowerShell, moves our use of PowerShell from actually querying the Active Directory to trying to parse out the Active Directory results. It's actually a bit better to query it directly from PowerShell. Now, why is that? When we query the information with DSQuery and then process the result with PowerShell, all we're handling is text. However, when we query directly using PowerShell, now we have access to all of the objects because it's actually returning objects to us. Let me just give a quick example. Let's imagine that in your organization, you've made a modification to your Active Directory schema. Perhaps you've added another field to it. It is not easy to query for that added field using something like DSQuery and DSGet. It's not that you can't do it, but you would end up having to write a complicated search filter. On the other hand, if you've already created this code that you use the same way every single time, if you want to get out that extra field that you've created, well, let me show you how you do it. When we do our Active Directory search, one of the things we need to do is define the properties from the objects that we're querying that we'd like to load into our result. So I'll do a properties to load add, and then I just give the name of the property from the user object, or whatever the object is, that I'd like to see. So this actually is not terribly difficult to understand. Add, well, let's see, AD search, so in your search, in your result objects, load in this distinguished name. That's what I'd like. So if you created some custom property, you would simply use that name here. Now, the names of the different fields that are available are actually available in some of the Microsoft documentation, and we'll spend some time in some of our future episodes looking at the different things you can pull out and how some of them are quite useful. Because otherwise you may wonder, well, how do you know, for instance, that to get the SAM account name, that's what you type, a lowercase s with capital A-M-A? What's the story? Well, it's actually not that hard to understand what's happening here. So first let me explain where that name comes from. We know that the SAM account name, that makes sense. But what about the capitalization? Well, the capitalization is what's going to be called something like camel case. The first letter of the first word will be lowercased. For instance, I'd like to get the last logon timestamp. Now, the key word to do that is just what it sounds like, last logon timestamp. The letter of the first word will be lowercase, but the first letter of each subsequent word will be uppercase, like the humps on a camel. So it's sort of a pseudo camel case style of naming things. Now again, you do need to have the right name here, and we'll give you some of the resources on how to do that in some of the future episodes. But in this case here, what I've chosen to extract in my results is the distinguished name, the fully qualified name that we get out of our directory query, the logon name, the SAM account name, and the last logon timestamp, because that's the information I'd really like to see here. The next thing I can do, this is where it starts to get really easy, all of this upfront work done. I'm going to create another variable, I'll call it user objects, and I'm going to set that to be equal to the adsearch.findAll. In other words, go get them. Now for right now, I'm going to use a write host to write out the user objects variable. Now we may have some mixed results with this, so don't worry about that to start with. We're going to be making some adjustments to this as we go. Let's call this logontimes.ps1. There we go. And I'll just click the green arrow and start it up. And off it goes. And wow, what happened here? We get a couple of numbers here. It says 0, 1, 2, and then I get System Directory Services, search result, search result, search result. What is that? Well, this is the array of search results that were returned from my Active Directory query. What I need to do now is just go through each one of them and extract out the information that I'm really interested in seeing. So let me pull this line back out, and let's just demonstrate how I can loop through those results. Some of this is actually quite easy. For instance, this, I would like to look at each result. So for each, and I'll say each user in user objects. In other words, for each user object that you have, take each user object one at a time and put it into this thing called user. Each one of those will then be a search result. Now, to get at the search results, it's going to be made up of a series of properties. So let me just pull these out using some variables. I'm going to say that the DN, or distinguished name, is equal to user.properties, the properties on that result. And I'd like to, in those properties, get the item called distinguished name. And that's it. So that boilerplate stuff at the top looks complicated, but that goes in every piece of code. Actually, working with the results turns out to be pretty easy. How do we get the rest of it? Well, I'd also like to get the logon ID, or the SAM account name. So how would I do it? Well, you could probably guess that we're going to look for user properties .item SAM account name. And you'll notice that we're using exactly the same qualifier here because that's the qualifier, the property, that it's going to be associated with. The last piece of information we need is the actual logon time. So we'll now get that. That's going to be in user.properties.item last logon timestamp. There we go. And now we're ready to create some output. Now to do that, I could use the write host option, but there's actually a shortcut for this. If you'd just like to create output directly, we can simply put that inside of quotation marks, and it will output it to the screen. Now, in this case, the very first thing I'm putting out is the distinguished name, and the distinguished name can have all sorts of things in it. It could have commas in it. In fact, I know it will have commas in it because it's going to be an LDAP distinguished name. So we'll have things like CN equals domain, comma, OU equals. So I'm going to need to put the result that I'm going to output into quotation marks as well. Now, how do I do that? Well, the double quotes here are going to output to the screen or to standard output. If you want to output double quotes to standard output, you just put double quotes. And that actually is sort of like an escape that says, just show me one set. What I want you to do here is not start creating output to the screen. I don't want you to terminate output to the screen. I just want you to print the double quotes. And then you put the value you'd like to print, like the distinguished name, and whoops, and double quotes there, followed by the SAM account name, followed by the last logon. Now with that taken care of, we can actually take a look at what our output looks like. And I'm just going to take the extra space out from around these. You don't need to do that. I just feel like the output will be a little bit cleaner that way. And this will not quite be perfect, but it's a really good start. So again, I'll save it and click the Run button. And I do get a little bit of an error. So let's just take a look here. See, I probably made an error somewhere. Let's read. It's saying, cannot call a method on a null-valued expression. Oh, that's interesting. It's saying that the SAM account name, it doesn't know what to do with that. I'm getting a runtime exception. I'm also getting one for the distinguished name here. That's interesting. So let's see, user.properties.item. Let's see what I've done wrong here. dn equals $user.properties.item. Distinguished name appears to be spelled correctly. And there's my error. It's not in my function call here. It's actually right up here. Notice that I defined my results to go into user objects, but over here, I only used user object. So let me correct that, save it again, and we'll just run one more time. And I do get some output here. It's not all correct, so we're going to need to touch it up a little bit and see what's going on. For example, I see that the distinguished names appear to be missing. So I've done something incorrect there. We'll take a look. Maybe I've spelled something wrong. Let me just scroll up a little bit. Yeah, no, everything else looks okay. And I do also see that I seem to be missing the last logon time. So again, let's see what I've done wrong. I do see right away that I've spelled it distinguished instead of distinguished name. So let me correct that. I'll save it and rerun it, see if it helps. Yes, there are the distinguished names. And now we're missing the logon time. And I think you can probably see what my error was. Here, I called it $last logon, but the name of the variable is actually just $logon. So let's just correct that. Save it. And there will be one other little problem. I've got a really great output now. I'm seeing that there is a distinguished name. I've got the Windows, well, in this case, the logon name, and you'll see there are computers in here as well, because computer accounts, it turns out, are of object class user. How could I extract those from these output? Well, we'll come back to that in a later episode. But then following that, I find that I've got the actual timestamp. Now, the timestamp here does not make a lot of sense. It's just a big, long string because of how timestamps are generated in Windows. They're actually very, very accurate and can be accurate all the way back to the 1600s. However, we need to translate that into something we can use. Additionally, you'll find that some accounts have nothing showing up as a timestamp. So what's the story? What do we need to do? Well, a little research will reveal that here's our problem. The last logon time is going to be null or empty if the user has never logged in. So let's add a little condition here. Let's say if the logon.count, because the logon value here is actually going to be an array of values that makes up this actual time. So I'm going to say if the count is equal to 0, so how many things are there? None. In other words, it's an empty value. It's null. Then what I'd like to do is set last logon equal to never. Fantastic. So that'll end that. But now, how do I deal with this big long timestamp here? I'd like to convert that into a usable date, so when I'm looking at this, it makes some sense to me. Well, let's add an else clause. Else, in other words, if the logon count is empty, do that. But if it's not empty, here's what I'd like to do. What I'd like to do is set the last logon value to be equal to, now again, we're going to reference a class. So I'm saying that this is this type of object. I want to take the first value. We're converting it over to be a datetime object. So rather than being just a raw number there, it's now going to turn it into a usable value. Now, to get at that information, we are going to have to change this here to last logon, because that's what I've used in defining the never value and defining the actual date time. So let me save it one more time, run it, and we've got a big improvement. Now I can see users who have never logged in, but I'm also finding that the dates are a little odd. For instance, this one, July 12th in 410. This one is October 5th in 411. This one here is January 2nd in the year 412. What's the deal? Well, instead of getting into a long explanation, let me just say this. The problem is that the date time value created here doesn't have any kind of an offset to the current century. So what we need to do to correct this is to simply take the last logon value and set it equal to the last logon value, and we're going to add some years to it. Now, how is it that I can just say add years? Where did that come from? Well, remember in the line before this, we said that we were setting that to be equal to a datetime object. And the datetime object has a method to add years. So if I simply add 1600 years and now rerun that code, notice that my dates look just fine. And of course we can localize this even more and get the exact timestamp as localized to wherever we're looking at this output. Well, I think that'll be enough for today, but let's just recap what we've done. Using this simple script, we've now got a way that we can pull out information in a comma-separated format of all of the users and the last logon time for those users. It is true that we're currently seeing the computers in there too, but you know what? That's not a bad thing. For example, when you look at computer accounts and find that computer accounts have not logged in a while, you're probably looking at a computer that has disappeared out of your domain. For example, this one here, this computer, and actually the one before it, from 2010, this computer absolutely is gone from the domain. No wonder it hasn't logged in since July 12th of 2010. Because your computers, it turns out, also have logon credentials that are changed and managed behind the scenes. So looking at the computer accounts here too is still somewhat useful because it can show us whether or not accounts and computers are actually being pulled out of the domain correctly as new equipment is brought in. So I would like to still see those in my report. I'm not going to try to filter them out here. For the users though, it helps us to see users who in this case have never logged in or perhaps have not logged in a long period of time. One of the things that we might like to do is to sort of create a little bit of an intersection here where I'd like to see all of the users who have never logged in or have not logged in a long time and whose accounts are not disabled. Now that would be very interesting because that would show me accounts that have not been disabled and the users, the accounts you can still log in, but the users apparently are not around. So what's the story? Why are those accounts there? Again, allowing us as an auditor to take a step back and look at the process. In one of the audits that I'm involved in right now, one of the questions that we have, a very high-level question, is whether or not user accounts are being properly terminated out of the domain. And it's the responsibility of some of the individuals running the company to ensure that has happened. Now, the people who are responsible for it are quite high level. So really what we're looking for there is whether or not they have implemented correct process, policy, and procedure, and that's actually being followed within the organization. Because they may believe it is, but it may turn out that it's not be. And that gives us the ability to comment on the effectiveness of the controls within the organization. Well, I hope you found this episode useful. We will post the source code for this script along with the show notes, and we'll take a look at some of the different ways that we can work with Active Directory and do some basic filtering, just expanding on this basic script in some of our future episodes. Again, if you'd like to send in a suggestion for a future episode, feel free to do so and just direct that email to dhoelzer@enclaveforensics.com. Thank you very much for listening.